but also the risk of some wintry showers, especially across the northern half of the country. And then as we kind of look towards the middle part of the week, milder air does look like it's going to return eventually, especially across the southern half of the country, but it will come with the risk of some further rain.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like. Absolutely. On Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
On your TV, online and on your wireless. Today we'll be discussing cancel culture across the country, as well as the right to freedom of speech. But first, here's the news with Ray Addison.
Good afternoon, it's 3 o'clock. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Gary Lineker has refused to say if he still works for the BBC, as he faced questions from journalists this morning. The Match of the Day host replied, "I can't say anything," as he left his London home. Last night's episode of Match of the Day was watched by 2.6 million viewers. That's more than 500,000 more than the week before, and despite airing without presenters or pundits. Gary Lineker had been told to step aside by the broadcaster following his criticism of the government's migration policy. That caused a boycott from fellow broadcasters. Former BBC executive Roger Bolton says the controversy is diverting attention away from the real issue.
It's this argument about what is impartiality and who must be impartial that is a wider question. Of course, the other thing that's happening here is the political parties, particularly the governing parties, see this as a wonderful opportunity in the culture wars to create trouble and divert attention from the fundamental issue here, which is illegal immigration, which is extraordinarily difficult to deal with.
Well, the Prime Minister is flying to the United States to discuss the AUKUS defence deal between the UK, US and Australia. It's hoped that after a summit with President Biden, the Australian Premier will announce the purchase of British nuclear-powered submarines. It follows talks this morning between Rishi Sunak and the NATO Secretary-General, where the UK reaffirmed its commitment to help counter the threat from Russia. While in the US, Mr Sunak is also expected to announce a defence and foreign policy update. Well, the Prime Minister says he recognises the anxiety over the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, but the government is working to find a solution to secure customers' liquidity and cash flow. Rishi Sunak says he doesn't believe there's a systemic risk to British tech companies, but the Treasury is working at pace to find a solution. The Chancellor and the Governor of the Bank of England have been in discussions to provide a financial backstop for those affected. Last Friday, SVB's American parent company became the biggest failure of a US bank since the 2008 financial crisis. It's currently under US government control. The Health Secretary has criticised junior doctors for failing to call off strike action on Monday. Writing in The Telegraph, Steve Barclay described the 72-hour walkout as incredibly disappointing. Well, meanwhile, the British Medical Association has described Mr Barclay's recent offer to negotiate as a feeble attempt to stall us. It's expected to affect many services on Monday, including A&E, cancer care and maternity. Kevin Marr is a former Labour advisor. He told us there's still time to avoid this strike.
There's a very, very small window to try and avert what's going to be a catastrophic stoppage for the NHS. 500,000 appointments cancelled. I mean, that's the implications for patient safety are pretty profound, and that won't be lost, to be fair, either in government or by the junior doctors. And I suspect if Steve Barclay comes forward with some sort of sincere and meaningful proposal that they may curtail the strike early.
And the final preparations are underway for one of the biggest nights in Hollywood as celebrities prepare for the 95th Oscar Awards, with British and Irish talent hoping for a win. The Banshees of Inisheer has become the most Oscar-nominated Irish film ever, getting 9 nods. Meanwhile, British actor Bill Nighy is up for Best Actor for his role in the movie Living, and Andrea Riseborough received a Best Actress nomination for her role in the movie To Leslie. Showbiz reporter Stephanie Tecci says Riseborough's nomination was surprising.
Last minute, we had a wild card, Andrea Riseborough. She's British, so she is flying the flag for Brits. But she starred in this film called To Leslie, in which she plays an alcoholic. And no one had heard about this movie, Stephen. It was literally a week before nominations. And this is what you call star power. People like Gwyneth Paltrow, Charlize Theron and Jennifer Aniston, they got behind it and campaigned and said this should be up for an Oscar nomination. So it was very much a nomination by social media.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Father Calvin.
Cancel culture is a toxic weapon used by the woke mob to cancel free speech. I describe it as a pressure tactic entitled groups use to get their own way, because I think they lean on individuals and organisations, just like mob bosses, with threats of ostracisation. Do as we say or we'll know you're not a good person. Join us in virtue signalling or we'll mark you out as the enemy. This week alone I've been cancelled twice. The Royal Academy of Dance, where I was a board member, sacked me without so much as a conversation. And from what I can make out, it's because I had protested against drag queen story time. And as viewers of this show will know, I said it was inappropriate for scantily dressed blokes in dresses to be gyrating and thrusting in front of children, and that it was not age appropriate. I also had a drag act on my show to share their perspective, just because that's how we do things around here. However, the RAD weren't happy with being associated with me after that and fired me without so much as a thanks for my years of service. I let them know that I found their position highly suspect, but they have since responded, clarifying the RAD does not approve of the sexualisation of young children in any way, and we categorically refute any insinuation that this is what we stood for. And then there was an issue with our Easter special. Regular GB News viewers will know we like to produce beautiful Easter and Christmas specials to glorify Jesus Christ on his birthday and on the memorial of his death and resurrection. We're about to do our Easter special. We booked a stunning church as the location with a very supportive priest and congregation, many of whom I know watch our show. Their church's choir, however, some of whom may not be even practicing Christians, raised concerns with the priest as they took offence at some of my views. I don't know how many members of the choir complained, it could have been just one. But rather than refuting them and explaining how I'm not hateful, I'm not homophobic, I just adhere to the Christian teachings on sex and sexuality, the priest and the ordinary buckled under the pressure and cancelled our Easter special a week before we were due to film it. This is the power the woke mob has. All it takes is one emotional complaint and your plans can come crumbling down. They've ended careers, they have ruined lives. I mean, look at what happened to Kathleen Stock, for example. And where they haven't succeeded, i.e. J.K. Rowling, they never give up trying. I think it's high time we started standing up to the woke mob and saying, no more. We will not capitulate. That means we cannot join them in their divisive tactics. This week, Gary Lineker was suspended from presenting Match of the Day on the BBC for breaching impartiality rules. And some would say it's a long time coming, but I will not celebrate it, and I will not encourage further hostilities towards him. Mr. Lineker has a massive platform. He can and should continue to fight for what he believes in. He cannot do that at the BBC because we refuse to pay for it, but I support his right to free speech and would encourage him set up a YouTube channel or use your Twitter account, Gary, to further get his message out there. It's a message I entirely disagree with for the most part, but that's the purpose of free speech. If we truly believe in free speech, we should be prepared to defend those who we think are wrong. In a week of cancellations, I say shame on the Royal Academy of Dance, shame on the woke members of the choir, shame on the church for cancelling our Easter special instead of standing firm in the faith. And go, Gary. Let's see what comes next from you. I look forward to telling you why you're wrong on so many issues, but use your voice. Just don't force us to pay for it. Hello and welcome to the Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson. Here's what's coming up this afternoon. The boss of the BBC, Tim Davie, says he will not resign over the handling of Gary Lineker's suspension. We'll be debating if the footballer should be reinstated. A mother has said that her daughter was left upset following a graphic sex education lesson at a school on the Isle of Man. We ask, is the government right to call for an urgent review? Plus, a Christian preacher who was convicted of public order offence after calling a trans woman a gentleman has had their harassment conviction quashed. We'll be talking about the right to free speech. And of course, you can join in any of our discussions by emailing gbviews at GBNews or by tweeting at GBNews. Deswald. The BBC has urged to get a grip of the impartiality row over Gary Lineker as its sports coverage is facing disruption for a second consecutive day. According to overnight data, Match of the Day, which aired without presenters, achieved 2.6 million viewers, almost 500,000 more than the previous week. Boss Tim Davie has apologised to licence fee payers but said he will not resign over the issue. So I'm asking, has Tim Davie handled this well? And BBC impartiality rules, are they applied fairly across the board? Joining me now is the political commentator Joe Phillips, as well as Benjamin Loughnane, a research fellow from the Bow Group. Benjamin, I'll start with you if you don't mind. Are you a free speech absolutist?
Yeah, I believe very strongly in free speech. However, I also recognise there's a double standard here. So where was Gary Lineker when all of the other people were being cancelled? When, for example, Andrew Bridgen said something not entirely dissimilar to what he said. He made a comparison to 1930s Germany in light of a recent political event. And he said, this is very similar to what we've seen before. Now, Gary Lineker says the exact same thing about a slightly different issue, and everyone comes out and they go on strike and say he's got a right to free speech. But they weren't there when it happened to Andrew Bridgen, when he had the whip removed from the Conservative Party and so on and so forth. So the real reason I'm against this, with Gary Lineker, isn't because I oppose this right to free speech, or even because he's being paid so much out of the public purse to do sports commentary, but the fact that there's a double standard, and it's because he's a lovey of the left. That's the only reason they're defending him.
Joe Phillips, is this a case of first they came for the Conservatives and I didn't speak out because I wasn't Conservative?
Well, I think the problem is that the BBC have got themselves in a real pickle. over this. And, you know, there is the elephant in the room, Calvin, which, of course, is the chairman, Richard Sharp, a great mate of Boris Johnson's, appointed by government, and, you know, had facilitated a meeting between Boris Johnson and a man who then went on to lend him, or offer to lend him, £800,000. Richard Sharp didn't declare this when he was being appointed, which seems slightly remiss. He is still sitting as chairman, and the former BBC chairman, the very highly respected Lord Patten, who would have been in his position as chairman, would have been involved in this. So you have got double standards, and Ben's absolutely right. You know, we've still got Alan Sugar, who urged people to vote Conservative in 2019, backed Boris Johnson for the leadership. You've got Conservative peer Karen Brady. They're still appearing on The Apprentice without any sanction. And I think the problem is that, you know, Gary Lineker is not a news presenter. If this was Hugh Edwards, of course, you know, it would be ridiculous. He's not. He's a sports presenter, and he's a very, very good sports presenter. What he said was in a personal capacity. Nobody thinks that is the BBC's position. It doesn't really matter how much he earns, because he could probably earn treble that, at least if he was working for a commercial outlet. But the real problem is that whilst we're talking about this, we're not talking about the issue at the heart of it, which is the government's illegal immigration bill. Now, we've already heard on GB News earlier the former Justice Secretary, Robert Buckland, voice his concerns about what happens to children under the plans. The government themselves have admitted that it is possibly illegal, and it is certainly impractical. So, you know, you will know as a man of the cloth that the Archbishop of York, Stephen Cottrell, has joined more than 350 charities, clerics, multi-faith groups and businesses and health professionals in condemning this. So that's what we need to get back to, the subject at the heart of this.
Well, let's move on from Gary Lineker then. For Ofcom impartiality sakes, Joe Phillips said that Gary Lineker is a very good sports commentator. I cannot confirm or deny that. That was Joe Phillips, political commentator, and Benjamin Loughnane from the Bow Group. In an interview with BBC News, Davey said, "Success for me is getting Gary back on air, and together we are giving to the audiences that world-class sports coverage, which, as I say, I'm sorry we haven't been able to deliver today." He admitted, quote, "This has been a tough time for the BBC." In a statement yesterday, the BBC said, "The BBC has been in extensive discussions with Gary and his team in recent days. We have said that we consider his recent social media activity to be a breach of our guidelines. The BBC has decided that he will step back from presenting Match of the Day until we've got an agreed and clear position on his use of social media. When it comes to leading our football and sports coverage, Gary is second to none. We have never said that Gary should be an opinion-free zone or that he can't have a view on issues that matter to him, but we have said that he should keep well away from taking sides on party political issues or political controversies." According to the Daily Mail, the mother of a pupil at an Isle of Man school embroiled in a sexual education scandal has complained that her daughter was left upset after allegedly being taught graphic content in a lesson. An independent review has been launched into Queen Elizabeth II High School after a Year 7 children were reportedly left traumatised after having sex education lessons. The news comes as the Prime Minister confirmed this week he has launched a review into sex education classes. Joe and Ben are still with me to debate this issue. The issue that I have with this, Ben, is that this new RSE, this relationship and sex education curriculum that is causing all of these issues, was brought in under the Conservatives. So are they going to launch a thorough review, or is it even in their interest to do so?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely disgraceful that you've had a Conservative Party in power for about 13 years of an 80-seat majority, and this sort of thing is going on. I mean, what's the point in voting for a Conservative Party that upholds values which are patently progressive? You might make a very good case for having sex and relationship education in schools for 11-year-olds. I personally disagree with it, and I think it's wrong, but it's certainly not a Conservative position. It's a progressive one. And you do have to question why a Conservative government has allowed this to go on for so long. I personally think that, you know, one of the reasons it's happening is it's a political issue. It's a case of if you teach children these things when they're young, they're more likely to accept them because it comes from a position of authority. But there's absolutely no safeguarding around this. There's no care for the children. I mean, these are not appropriate subjects to be discussing with children. And I do think it's driven entirely by progressive political agendas.
I tend to agree, Ben. Joe, I do have to clarify that this is a UK review that Rishi Sunak has said he's going to institute, not in the Isle of Man, which has a separate curriculum, actually. But this is broader. This is happening all over the UK. Joe, is this a Trojan horse? Are we seeing here the indoctrination of young minds towards an LGBTQ ideology?
No, and I think it's completely disingenuous for Rishi Sunak to say he's launching a review, which was in response to Miriam Cates at Prime Minister's Question Time on Wednesday. There is already a review going on. And I think it's important to put this into context, that there's been 2 surveys. A report from the Children's Commissioner for England last month highlighted the violent nature of much of the pornography that children are reported seeing at a young age. A third of children had seen porn by the age of 10. And another study by a charity called Dignify that researches sexual abuse spoke to 4,000 children and discovered that 22% of them had viewed porn on multiple occasions. Now, children have got access to this sort of pornography, which is unfiltered, unmodified, and often of a very, very violent nature. There are questions around sex education in schools, and obviously it has to be age appropriate and dealt with properly. There are also questions, I think, legitimate questions about the outsourcing of sex education, which has been one of the problems, as far as I understand it. I mean, we're obviously not going to talk about this particular case, but it's really important that young people in a safe environment with their peers are able to discuss freely the issues that they are confronting on a daily basis. They're bombarded with sexual harassment, sexual imagery, often, as I say, as a pornographic nature. And it's really important that they get access to information.
I'm going to bring Ben back in, Joe, because I hear this argument quite a lot. They're going to see pornography anyway, so they need to be taught it in schools. Surely, Ben, actually, we need to be cutting out the number of kids that are seeing pornography at a young age. Surely we need to be monitoring their internet access and restricting this in the first place rather than teaching it younger and younger.
Yeah, absolutely. The answer to children having access to this sort of content isn't to contextualise it in school and try to justify it and make it okay by dressing it up. It's to prevent them from accessing it in the first place. And fundamentally, that is the job not of the teachers, not of the government, but of parents. And this is why we need a stronger sense of family in this country. We far too often nowadays think the solution to the decline of the family is the state or the schools or the teachers, but it's not. We need to build stronger families who look after their children, prevent them from seeing these things in the first place.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Joe Phillips.
Kelvin, I just want to make a point, just a clarification. There is no suggestion at all that sex education in schools is legitimising pornography, which is the inference that Ben and you have just made.
That's not the suggestion at all. The suggestion I was making is that just because they're seeing pornography doesn't mean we need to teach sex education younger. We need to prevent them seeing pornography is the point I was trying to make. But thank you, Joe Phillips and Benjamin Loughnane, very much. Charlotte Clark, head of Queen Elizabeth II High School, said, having viewed a video which is currently circulating on social media relating to the school's RSE curriculum and its delivery, we are concerned that there could be a number of inaccuracies with the information being shared. Given the concerns being raised and in order to be open and transparent, we requested an independent review into the situation. As such, I am happy to take part in the independent review which is being deployed by the Department of Education, Sport and Culture, and would encourage our community to avoid speculation at this time. Plenty more to come this afternoon on my Common Sense Crusade. Up next, according to a study, the majority of Generation Z and millennials believe women's rights have gone too far. I spoke with historian David Starkey about what he thinks about the issue. First, here's the latest weather.
Hello, I'm Craig Snow and here's your latest forecast on the Met Office. Well, the week ahead does look like it's going to be unsettled across the UK. Risk of some further sleet and snow as well, especially across the northern half of the country during the first part of the week. But for the rest of Sunday, we do actually have mild air across most of the UK. Cold air just holding on across the very far north of the country. But this mild air does come with a lot of rain, and this band of rain will actually move its way northwards as we go through the course of the night, accompanied by some brisk winds, especially across the southern half of the country. Could turn quite windy here for a time as the night goes on. And as that rain bumps up into the colder air across the far north, we will start to see some sleet and snow. But in the south, no problems with temperatures falling not much lower than 10 to 11 degrees in most towns and cities. So Monday across the south, generally going to be a blustery day with some bright spells, but also some outbreaks of rain. But to the north, This band of rain will start to actually sink its way southwards again, turning increasingly to sleet and snow across Scotland and eventually across Northern Ireland and Northern England too. So for this part of the world, we could see some further disruption as we go through the course of tomorrow, courtesy of the snow. But to the south of it, a mild day once again could see highs reaching 14 or 15 degrees. Into the evening, the cold air begins to sink its way a bit further southwards, so risk of some sleet and snow across parts of Wales and eventually into the Midlands too. And overall, a cold and icy night to come across the northern half of the country. To the south of it, the rain will take a little bit longer to clear, so probably no real problems with frost across the southeastern parts of the country as we start Tuesday. But Tuesday generally will be a cold day for all of us. Plenty of bright spells actually to be had, but also the risk of some wintry showers, especially across the northern half of the country. And then as we kind of look towards the middle part of the week, milder air does look like it's going to return eventually, especially across the southern half of the country, but it will come with the risk of some further rain.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236. And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not
believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Welcome back to the Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson, on your TV, online and on your wireless.
A surprising number of people in younger generations believe that women's rights have gone too far. New research conducted by Ipsos and the Global Institute for Women's Leadership at King's College London found that over half of people in younger generations believe the push for equality is now negatively impacting men. Earlier, I spoke to the historian and broadcaster Dr. David Starkey for his views on the issue. David Starkey, why do you think young people seem to be disillusioned with women's rights movements?
Well, maybe it could be called experience, dare I suggest, Calvin, particularly if the chaps find themselves mocked, perpetually accused of rape, of sexual license, of violence, of toxic masculinity, and so on and so on. So perhaps, oddly enough, they could think maybe things have gone a bit too far. Maybe there are problems. And you see, I think the great problem, Calvin, if we just lift ourselves out of that survey and do what you and I should be doing, which is go back and asking big questions. The real problem with the whole notion of female equality, like of every other kind of campaign for equality, is that it confronts the brutal fact of human difference. How do you have a notion of equality and somehow make it compatible with the fact that in most ordinary meanings of the word equal, people aren't equal? And I think this issue, as it were, looms particularly strongly because, of course, we're dealing with a 50-50, roughly, setting aside trans, which we're going to have to talk about, a 50-50 split within humanity. I think, again, it's very interesting that it's generationally different. That my generation, the baby boomer and whatever, that saw the initial parts of the process are on the whole still pretty relaxed about it. Once you're actually getting the full toxic measure, and particularly the intrusion of law into every aspect of intimate relationships. I mean, this is the other issue. So let's just go back and look at how you try and deal with this question of equality and difference. I mean, first of all, I think you and I would be perfectly happy with acknowledging from very different perspectives the fundamental differences between men and women, that they are enormous. They are biologically enormous. They, I think, are temperamentally enormous. We have different functions when it comes to the most fundamental business of reproduction. Now, early feminism, if you go back to the 18th, the 19th, and the earlier 20th century, early feminism was essentially about saying, or much of it was, that there really wasn't very much difference. This whole notion, as it develops, that the differences are socially conditioned, that really, okay, yes, men and women's bodies are different, but really their minds, their attitudes are fundamentally the same. In other words, you lie.
Well, this is it. As a Christian, I would say that men and women are equal in dignity and in worth, but very, very different in our roles in society, in family, in community. And that's important to recognise, as you've stated. But the feminist movement seems to want equality to mean that they're the same. So is there a criteria on equality under the feminist movement, would you say?
Well, what I was trying to say, I was trying to reinforce what you said, because I think it's important that in a sense, one looks at the biblical texts. I mean, the Pauline texts on this are totally specific about the idea of what I think is called men and women being complementary to each other, complementarity rather than equality. In other words, recognizing that they've got different roles, but that the different roles are equally valuable. Whereas, of course, what feminism has tended to do is to deny that there are fundamentally different roles, and in a sense to say that both should have the same role, with, of course, extraordinary problems clashing up against that brute fact.
We have to come round to the trans movement, because surely the trans movement has had some impact on the feminist movement, whether it's combative or complementary. Where do you think it comes to play?
Well, what I think is clear, Calvin, is that in a sense, feminism has been bitten on the bottom by trans. If you actually look at how trans rights are presented in terms of their affiliation and the spectrum, the normal way in which you present it is to say trans rights are an extension of gay rights. Now, and whole role of Stonewall in this, Stonewall having lost any function, because basically equality over homosexuality is generally recognised. And if you actually look at opinion polls, if you look at this opinion poll, it's barely contentious now. So Stonewall had to find something to do, and it jumped on the trans bandwagon. But of course, gay rights were never about a denial of biology. On the contrary, I know I was one of the pioneers. I'm so ancient, way back in the early 1970s. And I was one of the pioneers, and what we were calling for was a recognition of biology and a recognition of biological desires. So, in fact, trans derives directly from feminism, which is why, of course, people like Catherine Stock have been so beautifully caught. There's a wonderful essay by Douglas Murray, gloating, Douglas is very good at gloating disgracefully on the way that she's been caught between her later experiences and her early opinions, because her early opinions were completely about this business, that gender is merely socially constructed, that as it were, these things are independent of biology. Well, of course, the ultimate extremity of that is the notion of trans rights, in which what you say effectively is that you can perform an act of transubstantiation. I mean, this is what's going on in Scotland, forced Sturgeon's resignation. The fact that all a man needs to do is to say, I am a woman, and abracadabra, hocus pocus, hoc est corpus. You've suddenly become one. And I think this highlights the absolute absurdity of this.
Thank you very much, David Starkey, and the full conversation will be up on GB News YouTube. Joe Phillips is still with us. Joe, it's important to note that David isn't here to defend himself, but what do you make of his views?
Well, I love David dearly. We worked together a long, long time ago. He is a polemicist and he's very articulate. I don't agree with a word he says, obviously. And I know that we've got very, very limited time before we go to the break, Colvin. So I will just say this. Women make up 51% of the UK population. Earlier this week, or last week, in fact, Jess Phillips, a Labour MP, took over 5 minutes to read the names of 109 women who have been killed by men. The youngest was 15, the oldest was 92. There were just 3 male MPs in the chamber to listen to that. Working women earn 15% less than men. Women take on unpaid roles of caring, whether it's parenting or looking after elderly relatives. And at the moment, there are 250 rapes or attempted rapes, yet conviction rates are so low. Fewer than 1 in 60 rape cases has led to a charge in England and Wales, and the average wait to get to court is over 2 years. So I think, put that in perspective, because women are getting a raw deal.
That was Joe Phillips. Thank you very much. Here's the news.
(3:35). Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Gary Lineker has refused to say if he still works for the BBC as he faced questions from journalists this morning. The Match of the Day host replied, "I can't say anything," as he left his London home. However, his son has tweeted that he's proud of his father and that he shouldn't need to apologise for being a good person. Last night's episode of Match of the Day was watched by 2.6 million viewers. That's more than 500,000 more than the week before, and despite airing without presenters or pundits. The Prime Minister is flying to the United States to discuss the AUKUS defence deal between the UK, US and Australia. It's hoped that after a summit with President Biden, the Australian Premier will announce the purchase of British nuclear-powered submarines. It follows talks this morning between Rishi Sunak and the NATO Secretary-General, where the UK reaffirmed its commitment to help counter the threat from Russia. The Health Secretary has criticised junior doctors for failing to call off strike action on Monday. Writing in The Telegraph, Steve Barclay described their 72-hour walkout as incredibly disappointing. Meanwhile, the British Medical Association has described Mr Barclay's recent offer to negotiate as a feeble attempt to stall us. It's expected to affect many services, including A&E, cancer care and maternity. Well, the Prime Minister says he recognises the anxiety caused by the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, but says the government is working to find a solution to secure customers' liquidity and cash flow. Rishi Sunak said he doesn't believe there's a systemic risk to British tech companies, but the Treasury is working at pace to find a solution. Last Friday, SVB's American parent company became the biggest failure of a US bank since the 2008 financial crisis. It's now under US government control. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Father Calvin will be back in just a moment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, The People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Hello and welcome back to the Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson, on your TV, online and on your wireless. Parliament this week voted in favour of a clause of the Public Order Bill which criminalises any form of influence outside of abortion facilities, including, some argue, silent prayer. An amendment to permit silent prayer and consensual conversations within the so-called buffer zones was proposed by Andrew Lewer MP, but failed to pass. Some local authorities have already imposed similar buffer zones through Public Spaces Protection Orders, or PSPOs. We're now joined by Isabel Vaughan Spruce, a pro-life volunteer who has been arrested for praying outside an abortion centre, allegedly in breach of a PSPO. Isabel, welcome to the show again. You've been arrested in the past for silent prayer close to an abortion centre. We aren't going to talk about the specific cases, but viewers will be interested to hear about the religious beliefs which motivate you. So why have you chosen to pray outside an abortion clinic?
Hi, Calvin. Yeah, this is work I've been doing for about 20 years in Birmingham. Obviously, previously, I would have been there offering help and alternatives to women, and there's been many, many women who've accepted that help. But with the onset of the PSPO, I've been going there in prayer, and it's an issue that's very dear to my heart because I've got a lot of close friends who've been deeply affected by abortion. So this is something that, as I say, I feel very personally about as well.
Well, one of the top questions I see people ask whenever I post about this on social media is prayer is not proximate. It's not necessary to pray in that particular place. So why do you have to pray in that place?
I think maybe one of the best examples I could give would be something that whether people have got different pro-life beliefs or different faith beliefs would also maybe be able to appreciate. when someone has maybe a car accident, we'll often see flowers placed at the side of the road if there was a death there. Sometimes even if you climb up a mountain, you might see a marker there where somebody dies, even though they are no longer there. Space and time are very important to us as human beings who exist in space and time. But even for people who maybe don't appreciate or maybe share those views on why it's important to be at that particular spot, it's important to understand that PSPOs and buffer zones don't ban people, they ban behaviour.
Yeah.
So if they're not banning people, then those people must be allowed to think what they want in that area. We can't start censoring people's thoughts and saying because those thoughts are directed towards God, they're no longer acceptable, which is effectively what is happening.
A very good point. The PSPO itself forbids engaging in an act of approval or disapproval with respect to issues related to abortion services by any means, apparently. This includes, but is not limited to, protesting, prayer or counselling. Now, the councils say the PSPOs are in place to stop women being harassed. How do you respond to that?
I would say there's already laws against intimidation or harassment, and rightly so, but there was a review in 2018 conducted on behalf of the government, and it was concluded that it would be disproportionate to have buffer zones around abortion centres. There has never been any convictions of any pro-lifers for intimidation or harassment ever outside abortion centres. If this was happening, then pro-lifers would join forces to want to get rid of it, because clearly we want to be there, we want to be approachable to women. That's why we have so many women who do accept and talk to us, accept our help. We're in the public eye with all of the work we do. Most of my volunteers are photographed on a daily basis, so if there was any problems, I think there would be evidence by now.
I agree. So faith is a protected characteristic, Isabel. The legislation is designed to protect women using these facilities, but I wonder if you feel, where is your protection as a Christian?
This is something I've wondered too. We're very clued up nowadays on discrimination, particularly of minority groups, and I can't help but wondering, pro-lifers and Christians, even if they are considered to be minorities nowadays, where is our protection? And maybe just to back this up, to explain that with the PSPO that we have in Birmingham, my volunteers are now praying outside the PSPO, which is at the end of a road, barely even in sight of the abortion centre. And yet we're constantly being told that we need to move, the church needs to move. I would actually say that these PSPOs and buffer zones actually foster intolerance of faith communities, which is really concerning.
Yeah, absolutely. Isabel Vaughan-Spruce, thank you so much for joining us and for explaining your side of this debate. And now to debate the topic of whether silent prayer should be allowed outside abortion centres and whether there should be buffer zones at all, I'm joined by political commentator Joe Phillips and barrister and legal counsel for ADF UK, a faith-based legal advocacy firm who are supporting Isabel in her case. Lorcan and Price, now we can't discuss any current cases, but should silent prayer outside of abortion clinics and inside buffer zones be allowed and accepted as part of freedom of speech?
Yes, quite frankly, and you're not surprised I would say that. What we're talking about here is a human right that individuals have to be able to gather and to pray. We're also, fascinatingly, when we talk about silent prayer, we're talking about what's happening inside somebody's mind. You can be in a PSPO buffer zone thinking about the football scores or what you're going to do on holidays, and that's not a crime. But when you start to think about God in a manner that the authorities find objectionable, then you've wandered into committing a crime. And we've seen videos already from places like Bournemouth and Birmingham where the police are asking people, what are you thinking about? And in the Bournemouth video with a gentleman called Adam Smith-Connor, when he told them he was praying about his deceased son, they told him to stop. And so it was the act of prayer that triggered the criminal offence in the mind of the authorities. And they're quite clear as well in how they frame these PSPO orders, where they are deliberately targeting prayer, scripture, and even in some cases making the sign of the Christian cross. And that was mentioned in Bournemouth as well. Wow. So I think this is quite sinister. And as Isabel mentioned, it's not simply within the zone itself where we're talking about a public place, but also the wider effect it has on the attitudes that the authorities and the police take to manifestations of prayer in a public place. And we already see that creeping intolerance outside these zones.
Well, I'll come back to that. Joe, I want to ask you if you think the balance is right here between protecting women's access to these facilities and protecting the freedom of religion and freedom of expression and freedom of thought that are not just part of the Human Rights Convention of the UN, but also of the ECHR.
Well, you've already said, Calvin, that faith is a protected characteristic, and that's upheld, by international law. There is absolutely no question that any woman who is contemplating or going through the process of having an abortion has searched her soul and will not have taken that decision lightly. The last thing she needs is people in her face. It's got nothing to do with anybody apart from that woman. And one would hope that in many cases that there are partners or friends or family and people to support her. You don't see people of other faiths standing outside blood donating clinics stopping people from giving blood because they're opposed to transfusions. You don't see, as Stella Creasy, the MP, said, people standing outside surgeries where people are going for hip replacements or sexually transmitted disease, STI clinics. It's a form of silent passive aggression, and I think buffer zones are absolutely right. And I know, having worked for a local authority, that actually councillors make and take an awful lot of consideration about trying to weigh up the balance. But there seems to me that the 150 metre or yards thing, it allows people to make their silent protest. But as you've said, you can go and say your prayers in church, you can say your prayers on the bus. You don't have to do it in somebody's face.
I want to come back to Lorcan, because here we're conflating blood donations, hip replacements with the killing of an unborn child. I think there's quite a clear difference here. Do you think that, I mean, Joe said that no one else has a right to be anywhere near these abortion centres, but we've heard, and I know you've heard from stories from...
Calvin, that's not what I said. That's not what I said. It has got nothing to do...
rewind if they want
Don't misquote me. It's got nothing to do with anybody apart from the woman making that decision.
Joe, I have so much limited time. I don't want to argue over what he said or she said, because people can rewind. The point I'm trying to make is that we have heard from so many women who have been approached outside abortion centres, not harassed, but provided alternative options, and have therefore ended up raising beautiful young boys and girls who they are so thankful for. And I think, Lorcan, I'd like to hear your perspective on this comparison between blood donations, hip replacements, and the killing of unborn children.
Well, I think your viewers can draw their own conclusions about those comparisons. I, for one, think that they're inappropriate, frankly. What we're talking about, again, and what Parliament actually made the decision to criminalise, are consensual conversations between individuals. An amendment, as you mentioned, was put down by an MP that sought to ensure that, yes, people accessing abortion facilities are allowed to do so, but that people being approached for consensual conversations and silent prayer would be permitted as well. And that was the correct balance, and alas, Parliament rejected it. But Isabel has told you that her work and those of other volunteers have created a situation where people have changed their minds. But we're now saying that there are significant chunks of public places within our cities and towns where a consensual conversation between members of the public in a public place, if it's about a certain issue that the government disapprove of and activist groups disapprove of, is a criminal offence. And I think that that's quite a sinister development. But the final point I would make about harassment and obstruction, and this is, rather than these other examples that Joe gave, this is the conflation that I think disturbs me the most, is that harassment, obstruction and intimidation are already crimes, and nobody is advocating for those. And even by their own measure, pro-life activists like Isabel Vaughan Spruce would not regard those as being effective measures to try and open a discussion with a woman. So we're not talking about those things here. What we're talking about is criminalising consensual conversations and silent prayer, and that's simply unnecessary.
Right, I want to bring Joe back because I don't want to misquote you, but I believe you said something about this being passive-aggressive. Do you think...
Yes, I think it is passive-aggressive.
Do you think it's... OK, but do you think it's right to legislate...
absolutely right.
Let me finish the question, then you can answer, Joe. Do you think it's right to legislate against passive-aggressive behaviour?
Yes, I do, because I think this is a case where people need to have protection. It's a very private thing. They need to be able to go and seek the treatment and the advice for whatever reason. It's got nothing to do with anybody else. And I think
we'll leave it
it is a fairly unusual case for sure. But I think this law has come in because of the harassment that women faced. And I think, there is a sort of form of harassment that can be silent and not, but equally intimidating.
I haven't seen any evidence of any harassment either. It seems like we're protecting a religious sacrament of Satanism, if I'm honest with you. But thank you very much, Joe Phillips and Lorcan Price. Thank you for your time today. Before we move on today, let's have a look at what you've had to say about the topics we've been discussing. Richard says, I agree free speech is a must in a democratic society, but I take umbrage and I'm offended at Lineker comparing the government's language to that of 1930s Germany and the Nazis. He must apologise and do some research on Nazi times. Well, indeed, it's lazy, isn't it? Everyone always goes straight to Godwin's law. It's just a lazy argument. Don't go there. It's not appropriate. And whether women's rights have gone too far in light of a new poll suggesting young people think so, Carl says, is there any law that a man has a woman doesn't have? No. So therefore we have equality. Job done. Thanks, Cole. Reacting to my monologue on cancel culture, Kath says, with you all the way, Calvin. Keep speaking up for the public and your and my strong Christian beliefs. I've read the end of the Bible. We win. God bless you always. Oh, that's so kind. Thank you, Kath. We've already won. Christ already won the battle. This is just the devil going down, kicking and screaming. That's what we're seeing. Christopher says, I admire your strength, Calvin. I believe there is an anti-Christian agenda at work. It's quite explicit at this time. We see it everywhere, don't we? Thank you very much for your emails today. Really do appreciate it and keep them coming in. Now, a Christian street preacher who had been found guilty of harassing a transgender person through misgendering had his conviction quashed this week. David McConnell from Wakefield had been given a 12-month community order and 80 hours unpaid work in September 2022, but his conviction was overturned at Leeds Magistrates Court this week. Christian preacher David McConnell joins me now. First of all, congratulations. Common sense does win out occasionally. Some people say you should not misgender someone and that it's hateful to do so. How do you respond?
Well, in my view, I didn't misgender anybody because the person standing in front of me was obviously a male, so I gendered accurately and correctly. I believe very much that God didn't get it wrong when he made two genders, male and female. And I believe strongly that God cares about the distinction between men and women. And, you know, so in my view, I need to represent God when I'm out there preaching. And I refer to all people as my IC. So I refer to all men as men and all women as women.
Preacher, I've got to ask you this because you were attacked, you were abused, you were robbed, and yet you were the one who was arrested for using the wrong pronoun. Is this sorry state of affairs a sign of the times?
It absolutely is because, you know, in my view, I've been open air preaching, Calvin, for 15 years. Pretty much soon after I got converted, I've been out there preaching, and pretty much very, very lately we're seeing a greater trend while out there of not just members of the public being, you know, even more aggressive, but when the police turn up, when I'm out there preaching, that I find that many police officers seem to be more favourable to you know, people within the crowd than they are of the Christian preachers.
Well, thank you, David McConnell, for everything you do. Keep preaching, keep speaking the truth, and do not let them shut you up. That's just my opinion. Yeah. That was David McConnell, Christian preacher. Recorder Anthony Hawkes said, we live in a time when free speech is important and vital, and we live in a time when people's attitude towards gender are very different from how they were years ago. All these issues need to be properly respected, so I make no criticism whatsoever of the Crown bringing the prosecution in this case. You have been watching Calvin's Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson. There's no time for the collect today, so I'll say the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Ghost be with us all evermore. Amen. See you next week. God bless.
Hello, I'm Craig Snow and here's your latest forecast from the Met Office. Well, the week ahead does look like it's going to be unsettled across the UK. Risk of some further sleet and snow as well, especially across the northern half of the country during the first part of the week. But for the rest of Sunday, we do actually have mild air across most of the UK. Cold air just holding on across the very far north of the country. But this mild air does come with a lot of rain, and this band of rain will actually move its way northwards as we go through the course of the night, accompanied by some brisk winds, especially across the southern half of the country. Could turn quite windy here for a time as the night goes on. And as that rain bumps up into the colder air across the far north, we will start to see some sleet and snow. But in the south, no problems with temperatures falling not much lower than 10 to 11 degrees in most towns and cities. So Monday across the south, generally going to be a blustery day with some bright spells, but also some outbreaks of rain. But to the north, This band of rain will start to actually sink its way southwards again, turning increasingly to sleet and snow across Scotland and eventually across Northern Ireland and Northern England too. So for this part of the world, we could see some further disruption as we go through the course of tomorrow, courtesy of the snow. But to the south of it, a mild day once again could see highs reaching 14 or 15 degrees. Into the evening, the cold air begins to sink its way a bit further southwards, so risk of some sleet and snow across parts of Wales and eventually into the Midlands too. And overall, a cold and icy night to come across the northern half of the country. To the south of it, the rain will take a little bit longer to clear, so probably no real problems with frost across the southeastern parts of the country as we start Tuesday. But Tuesday generally will be a cold day for all of us. Plenty of bright spells actually to be had, but also the risk of some wintry showers, especially across the northern half of the country. And then as we kind of look towards the middle part of the week, milder air does look like it's going to return.